Hello and welcome to the Jim Dandy Audio X-Ray, where we look inside one song and examine its production using Logic Pro. Today we're going to look at the song Slightest Touch, and we're going to look at the 3 steps of audio production: tracking, mixing, and mastering. But first, let's hear a little bit of that song, Slightest Touch. Here it is.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again. The clouds will fill the sky again tonight. But to know you're here will guide me through to the light.
Okay, so when we're talking about the 3 stages of tracking, mixing, and mastering, what I do is I tend to use 3 separate projects in Logic for each of those steps. So what we're looking at here right now is the tracking project for this song. There is a track. It's a fairly basic setup. Basically, 1 track for each instrument. There's a few here where we have a couple of tracks for the guitar right and a couple of tracks here for the guitar left. And if we look at the mixer, we will see that there isn't a whole lot of processing, especially if we use, for example, the vocals here. We don't have a lot of processing on. In fact, most of it is turned off. The main things I think about when I'm doing tracking is timing, tuning, and tone. And of course, this extends through the whole process of tracking, which is recording the performance and trying to get the best performance out of your instruments and musicians to record the different stems of the song. And but for now, we're mainly interested in that when it comes to in-the-box production with DAW such as Logic Pro. And so when we're here looking at the tracking for, say, for example, the vocals here, then one of the things is the first stage, which is relatively simple, is looking at the timing and tuning of this performance. Ideally, you've recorded something that is fairly good, and therefore what you need to do on that front is relatively minimal. And there's a great tool with Logic Pro for this, and that, of course, is Flex Pitch. Call up the editor view here, and you can see that we have the waveform, and overlaid over top of that is the tools for Flex Pitch. If you're not familiar with how to use Flex Pitch, it's definitely worth digging into. It's a very useful and powerful tool. You can add or reduce the vibrato, the amount that things shift. You can adjust the pitch, bringing it up or down in small amounts. And of course, for the timing, if the timing is a little fast or a little bit slow, you can take the edge of this and you can see the waveform and it brings it back or forward, depending on what you need to get the performance where you want it to be. The third part of the tracking is, of course, the tone. And with the tone, there's 2 things I think about. First is taking out excess room tone that may have snuck in through the recording process. For that, I rely on a third-party plugin. That's this first one here. And that's the SPL de-verb Plus, which you get through Plugin Alliance. It's sort of a magic utility, and it removes excess room tone from any of your recordings. So if I take the vocals here and solo them so they're just by themselves, and we hear it just without any processing, and if you listen to the ends of the phrases, you can hear a little bit of room tone sneaking in.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again.
If we take that same segment, add in the de-verb plus.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again.
As you can hear, it's just a little bit drier. Making that it will be a little bit easier to work with when we bring that into the mixing stage. The second thing is to add in some harmonics and some saturation. Using analog equipment, this happens with the preamps, where the transformers in them end up introducing a little bit of saturation and a bunch of harmonics, adding a little bit of color, a little bit of character. In the box, this plugin, another third-party plugin by Kazrog, the True Iron, emulates that. And so again, if we listen to this first with that taken out.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again.
And then putting that harmonics and saturation in.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again.
So it has a little bit of depth, a little bit of centering to that vocals. And you can see with the mix that this True Iron I've inserted into pretty much all of the tracks to add a little bit of that extra tone into those stems. Otherwise, especially with the vocals, there was a little bit of reverb and compression, but those were turned off. They were mainly just for helping with the recording of the vocals. But when I export it, that's been turned off. Some of these others, such as the bass here, has a few more plugins, a little bit more processing happening with EQ and compression, delay. These are basically just the settings from the virtual instrument settings that comes equipped with Logic Pro. So I just called up the virtual instrument and then basically only added the True Iron plugin to that. The other thing that you'll notice with all of these tracks here, if you look at the faders, all the gain faders are set at 0 and the pan knobs are all set to 0. So we're not really interested in setting any of those with the tracking. That comes with the next stage once we've exported these as stems into our mix project. So let's look at that next. Okay, here we are with our mix section. And with mixing, there's really two main things here that I focus on. One is a spatial balance and the other is tonal balance. We will look first at the spatial balance. So by this, what we're referring to is essentially the pan knobs on our different tracks, and of course the faders, bringing things to the left and the right, adjusting the loudness so that sounds closer or further away from us. And for me, often what I'm doing is I'm ending up working rough mixes on headphones. There's an issue with mixing on headphones, especially with spatial balance, and that's that we have a speaker that's strapped to the left ear and a separate speaker that's strapped to our right ear. And that's not really how our brains are designed to hear things. Normally, we have sound, say it comes in from the left side, it hits the left ear first, there's a split-second delay, and then it hits the right ear. And it has phase shifted. There's been some filtering because it passed through our head. And so the frequency has shifted a little bit. And that microsecond delay and that phase shift is what our brain uses to locate where that sound comes from. And of course, with headphones, you don't have that. So when you're trying to place something in the soundscape, and you're imagining that there's a drum kit in front of you, and beside that is the backup singer, and over on the other side, there's maybe the horns, you can't place things accurately using headphones unless you introduce some of that crosstalk or that crossfeed. And so one plugin that we can use for that is by Good Hertz, and that's the can opener. And essentially what this does is it provides some of that crossfeed, allowing you to approximate as if you're listening to speakers in a room. So if we take this mix here and we just play a section of it, first without, this is really a demonstration for people who happen to be listening on headphones. If you're not listening on headphones, this probably won't make much sense, but let's listen to a section of this.
The storms are at the door again today.
Now let's add in the can opener, listening for the depth, the left and the right.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again. The clouds will fill the sky again tonight. But to know you're here will guide me through to daylight.
So that's a very useful tool for those times when you're trying to do some of your mix on headphones. And again, I was mentioning that I do that just for the rough mix, starting to get it into shape so I can take little opportunities when it's just my computer and my headphones and start pulling things into shape. And then when I get into the studio with proper monitors, I can really fill it out from there much, much faster. The other aspect is tonal balance, and tonal balance happens a lot with the various processing with the plugins, etc. I should mention at this point that this template I have comes from Chris Van de Viver and his website whylogicprorules.com. I'll put information about this and the other plugins in the description, but if you haven't seen his blog or his video or his courses or his templates, you really should check them out. They've been extremely helpful to me. This mixing template and the mastering template, which we will see in a moment, both come from him. I've adapted them from there, but what we have, just to orient ourselves a little bit, is something that does a fair bit with track stacks and parallel processing. So if we look at the vocals by themselves here, then from this is a track stack underneath which there are these 4 additional tracks. The first one here, this is the one where I pulled in the stem from the tracking session, and that is this waveform here. On that waveform, you'll see that there is some standard processing that we'll have, and this is in series. So in other words, we go from our EQ next through to the de-esser, then through to some compression and some saturation. And so everything travels in a line and then eventually out to the stereo output. But then we have these sends. These sends send some of that signal to these 3 other tracks where there is some processing that happens in parallel. And so what we are able to do is we're able to take our track and then add some additional dimension to it. So actually what we'll do is we're going to remove a bunch of this processing that's been happening here. First on the top level track, we'll take out the series here, and then we'll take the parallel processing and just mute those. And let's listen first to get this set up properly. A little snippet of this same section here. This is just the vocals.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again. The clouds will fill the sky again tonight.
So that's basically what we exported out from the tracking project. If we add in this EQ, de-esser, compression, a little bit of saturation, and listen to that, this is what we end up with.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again. The clouds will fill the sky again tonight.
Okay, so not bad there. Now, what's going on with these parallel channels here? What we're doing with these is we're adding a little bit of higher compression that comes straight down the center. So we're sort of putting this underneath the track to add a little bit of stability. This next track, which is a stereo track, adds a chorus and pitch shifts, which actually broadens out the sound. So we're putting a little bit of processing to the sides of our original vocal track. And then the last one, the lift, mainly just adds a little bit of extra to the very top end to give a little bit of air, a little bit of height to everything. And so we're essentially taking our main track and then building around it, filling out the space around it. So if we take this and then add in that parallel processing, this is what we end up with.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again. The clouds will fill the sky again tonight.
So this same idea of the parallel processing and building out around each track to build that tonal balance, we have that also with some of the other ones, with, for example, especially with the drums. The drums, we have these 5 different parallel processing channels, and then a channel for each of the different parts of the drum kit. And so with the mix, we're really focused on first that spatial balance, which is placing things on the soundstage, and then adjusting the tone. This is using all our standard plugins, the EQ, the compression, and then any specialized things, including reverb, just to get us a tone that matches the need of the song. Some of that's guided, of course, by the genre that we're working with, but also, of course, we want something that also is specific to the song and what sounds good within the song. From here, we put this all and export it out as a mix, and we pull it into the mastering. So let's look at the mastering template. Okay, here we are with the mastering project, and you'll see that this is a project that has multiple songs. These are the songs from this whole album. You can see that each song has a single track. Slightest Touch is here. And the songs are arranged in sequence here. First song comes first, followed by the second song, third song, fourth song. But you'll see that they're not grouped in their channels that way. We have these 3 songs here, which show up at different points in the album in tracks that are adjacent to each other. Same with these 3 tracks here, including Slightest Touch, the one we've been working with. They're all grouped together here, even though they're not sequential in the album. The reason I've placed them here is because they share some of the same sound characteristics. And so when we set the settings, we're going to borrow some of those settings, specifically EQ, and share them across these 3 songs. So for example, here we are again with Slightest Touch. Let's hear a little bit of that in this mastering project.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to...
And then if we do something out of this song here, play a little bit of this song, just that song.
Small city lights light up the parking lot. Summertime, summer nights.
Now these ones have a similar tonal characteristic. This one that's off in a separate group here, if we listen to this one, you'll hear what I mean about a different tonal characteristic.
You're a small temperamental lion, ready to fly, but your shoes are undone. There's a fire in your eyes that...
So, again, this is a template that I've adapted from Chris Vandeviver's Y-Logic Pro Rules. I have a song set up on each of these tracks rather than just a couple of tracks for the whole album. The point of mastering, the main thing I keep in mind is that we want to try and get some clarity and some coherence in the sound. So we're doing very small adjustments, again, mainly EQ, a little bit of compression, and then, of course, limiting to bring the sound up to match the songs in relation to each other. So when we were looking at the mix, we were taking components of the tracking and mixing them together to make them so that they made sense as a song together. Here we are in the mastering stage. Now we've taken each of those songs and we're arranging and processing them in relation to each other so that they make a coherent whole. In this case, we're talking about an album. If you're talking about a single, then I would look at it in terms of in relation to other songs in that genre, in relation to other songs in the style of that band. And so that's what I mean by coherence with mastering. And so with that in mind, those are the three main stages with tracking, mixing, and mastering. It's sort of a 3-2-1, from tracking, looking at the timing, tuning, and tone, to the second stage, mixing, where it's spatial balance and tonal balance. Finally, with the mastering stage, where you're looking for some coherence and clarity. And those three stages, with a separate project for each of those, is basically how I like to organize the work that I do. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we've been listening to bits of this song. Now we're going to take it and listen to it start to end. I hope you'll be able to, as you listen to the song, pick out some of those things that go all the way through, from the timing and tuning to listening for how the tone has been shaped, looking and listening for that spatial and tonal balance, and finally looking here with the mastering, where we get to that final polish. Thanks for watching. Here is, from start to finish, Slightest Touch.
The storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again. The clouds will fill the sky again tonight. But to know you're here will guide me through to the light. I faulty past faulting all my present tense, the present form, and in perfect time, a perfect storm. An empty gaze, an empty light, a darkened thought, a darkened night. But the slightest touch, the slightest touch, the slightest touch, the slightest touch. There's no words that can explain, does it mean so much to feel you near, to feel your warmth, to feel your skin, your breath, your heart, your touch. The fears will raise their heads again today. Will wrap around my arms and legs again. The worries creep across the room tonight. But to know you're here will guide me through to the light. A distant look, a distant past, a narrow gap, a narrow path, a simple truth, a simple fact. The plainest day, the plainest talk, the hardest turn, the hardest lock. But the slightest touch, the slightest touch, the slightest touch, the slightest touch. There's no words that can explain, does it mean so much to feel you near, to feel your warmth, to feel your skin, your breath, your heart, your touch. Storms are at the door again today. The wind and doubt make it hard to breathe again. The clouds will fill the sky again tonight. But to know you're here will guide me through to the light. A faulty path, a faulty norm, a present tense, a present form, an imperfect time, a perfect storm. An empty gaze, an empty light, a darkened thought, a darkened night. But the slightest touch, the slightest touch, the slightest touch, the slightest touch. There's no words I can explain, does it mean so much to feel you near, to feel your warmth, to feel your skin, your breath, your heart, your touch.